you're the only one here, so you get double credit for being here.
Great.
This I'm going to start talking about chapter 8 here, which is the chapter on Immanuel Kant, and it's going to be pretty hard. So people are going to need to stay to stick with it, stay focused on it, pay attention to it, um, and you get a head start, of course, because you can ask me any question you want to. So let me start sharing the screen here. All right. Um, can you see it okay, Charles?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, uh, let me preface this by saying that we're probably going to go ahead with a second exam here coming up toward the middle of November. I'm thinking right now that I'll send that exam out on the 12th and it will be due on the 19th. So give you a week to work on it.
Uh-huh.
Now we got to go through we we got to go through about 2 to 3 lectures on Kant himself here, unless we get a long way today. And I'm thinking maybe we don't, even if we could, because it's going to be a lot of material. So I may take it slow with Kant simply because of the difficulty of the material. Because Kant's not an easy. Kant, number one, I think is probably the smartest guy that ever lived.
Really?
And secondly, um, he's he covers more things than anyone, at least since Plato or Aristotle. His philosophy is more complete, more as a unit or a whole than anyone since Plato and Aristotle, maybe even including them. He's a whole. He's thinks in terms of minutia, and he's also very holistic when he comes to his thinking. And much of the modern world owes its origin to this one man. As a matter of fact, he changes history and the history of thought. His 1748 uh, lecture or essay, I think it was a lecture that he turned into an essay, Was ist Aufklärung? In German, in English, it's what is enlightenment. He creates a new way of thinking. For the first time in history, he conceives human thinking as a movement within history that he calls the spirit of the times. Now we take that phrase for granted these days, but it didn't exist before Kant. That there could be a mass movement of intellectual that people could think and do and make things happen simply by their thinking just did not exist.
Enlightenment.
Yeah, yeah. He picks up on some of the things that have happened in France. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He owes a lot of the credit for this idea of enlightenment from Rousseau, but no one, including Rousseau, ever took it as holistically and completed it and incorporated it into a way of thinking as Kant did. And in in that regard, he has with this whole concept of enlightenment, he has a profound impact on American philosophy. Although American government and politics follows more of the Hobbes Mill Bentham sort of trajectory, its intellectual integrity, if it has any, and I think it does, its intellectual integrity comes from the importation of this idea of enlightenment that simply is invented by Immanuel Kant. So, in that regard, he's one of the most important influencers of ethics as it pertains to politics. And at the same time, he introduces, he's trained in physics as well as he is in philosophy. And he sort of writes, I guess we might say, the philosophy of Newtonian physics. But he also incorporates this idea of the human mind structures the world, and that paves the way for a new understanding of gravity and time that goes far beyond Newton, even. So, uh, in many ways, the theory of relativity, I think, has its origins in the intellectual structure of what Kant is doing in his philosophy. So, not only politics, but modern science, and especially this idea of relativity in Einstein, and then later Heisenberg's indeterminacy principle, all that's way beyond what you guys need to know. But just, I guess you take my word for it that he is extremely significant, not only in politics and philosophy, but physics. So let's go back just a minute and start over again. Like I said, he's probably um, the most important thinker in terms of changing things um, in world history. Now, he's trained in the philosophy of Descartes. Um, and I guess I need to go into Descartes just a little bit. Um, Descartes holds um, that the world is simply uh, begins, I guess we might say, with cognition. Um, he's there's a story about Descartes. He's an officer in an army, and he's hiding out from Napoleon in a oven, and he's been hunted down as an opposing soldier. The French are out to kill him and his regiment. So he's hiding out in a Dutch oven, and though you ever seen an igloo, you get the picture of these old ovens that used to be outside ovens in France and Germany and Holland. Mm-hmm. So he's hiding out in this oven. Of course, it's not owned at the time. And he begins to think about whether he exists or not, and whether he might be deluded, whether there might be a great Satan or some kind of nefarious being that made it appear to us that we were just existing. And by the way, this repeats itself in human history. Remember, the labyrinth is one of these things too. People are living plugged up, but are they really living? So this question is a perennial and an old question, and still, is with us today. But there's one thing that Descartes says cannot be doubted, and that he is, even if he's doubting, he's doing the doubting. So there's a famous phrase that Descartes invented, the cogito ergo sum, COGITO ERGOSUM, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. So that can't be doubted. The fact that I am thinking is indubitable. So we know mentally, at least, that we exist. Now, Descartes, that philosophy is a form of idealism. The way that gets connected to the world by Descartes is God. God guarantees that what I'm thinking really exists. So God's the placeholder. You understand that, Charles? God's the one that makes sure that when I see a table, that I really see a table, that it's not just a figment of my imagination. Does that make sense?
God gives us consciousness or verifies
No, we have consciousness. God verifies our consciousness.
verifies God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so he's an idealist. The reality of the concept is both outside us and inside us, and God's the placeholder for making sure that happens. So he has, he's got many proofs for the existence of God, which he thinks is logically necessary, um, especially if our perception is to be true. Without God, there's no guarantee that I'm actually looking at that table across the room from me and that there is an actual table there. If I turn my back on you, on my computer, does it exist? Maybe if I'm really quick, I can get up on it and see it why it's changing, but we don't know. So if I turn my back on my computer, God is the entity that holds that in place so that my experience is grounded in something.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So God is necessary in Descartes to make sure that the idea is representative of the thing. And without God, there is, in Descartes' mind, no proof that the world exists. So God keeps things in order. God not just doesn't just create in Descartes, but God continues ordaining that objects and thought are the same. Um, Now Kant's going to change that. Kant's basically going to do away with God. So in Kant, we don't have any proof that the thing is real. We don't have any 100% guarantee that what I'm thinking is really real, except I can check in with other sentient beings. So we can ask each other, were we in the same room? Do you see that table over there? Yes, I see that table over there. So we know that it's not just me that's seeing that table, but every sentient being is seeing that table. So we, instead of being um, instead of being absolutely guaranteed, it's percentage wise guaranteed. And that's all that we have according to Kant. But we'll get into that in a moment.
What's,
Yeah.
what's the word for that when you seek uh, another person's verification of what you perceive, like you just said, that table. But uh, doesn't everybody seek that? Everybody wants everybody to see that table. They don't want to think I'm the only one seeing that table, but
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
say, isn't there a
Well,
word? There's a word for
that, keep in mind, that's all the proof we have. Under Descartes, it's guaranteed that when I see that table and you see that table, God makes sure that both of us have the correct idea and it responds to the correct thing. So there's a one-to-one correspondence between the thought and the thing, and God is the entity that makes that happen in Descartes.
uh,
Now, Descartes was a great mathematician as well. So for Descartes, it's also God that makes sure that one thing is one thing and two things are two things and one plus one is two things. So God exists in just in science as much as he does in, or it does in human perception. We can't personify God. Uh, but God is some people, I think incorrectly, but some people have said that God is a God of the gaps in Descartes, that God makes sure that there are no gaps really between thought and thing. All right. Now let's talk about the English tradition and for a few minutes here. Descartes begins what most people call the rationalist tradition, and that is big on the continent. The empiricist tradition is big in England, um, which leads us to two English thinkers um, that even though one is an idealist and the other supposedly is a realist, they interchange a lot here. Berkeley, it looks like it says Berkeley, but it's pronounced Barclay. He was a bishop of the Episcopal Church, and or they don't call it, it's Anglican Church, I guess, in England. Um, but Bishop Berkeley was also a philosopher and is an extremely important thinker, even though he differs from the great tradition of English thinkers. He was an idealist instead of a realist. So he was an idealist similar to Kant and Descartes, but he also was at pains to speak to his tradition in England that was basically empiricist. And he has a profound influence on David Hume, a Scottish philosopher. That's probably other than Friedrich Nietzsche in Germany, probably the greatest skeptic that ever lived. So idealism, remember, says that the world begins with my idea. And I have to have some way of making sure that my idea actually corresponds to the world. God does that, you recall, in Descartes. And we simply do it probability wise, mathematically in Kant. But the other great tradition, the tradition of the Greeks, well, Plato was an idealist. I take that back. Plato's an idealist. Remember, the reality of the thought in Plato is in the realm of forms. You remember that? The
um,
otherworldly proof of this world. It's not mental, it's not physical. The soul comes from there. The soul comes into the body tainted as it is by material, but it's the recollection of the soul embedded in the body that gives us whatever truth we have. And that truth is a recollection. An anamnesis is the Greek word, which means more than just a recollection. Anamnesis means to make real rather than just to seem real. So the words don't really correspond with each other between Greek and English. But Plato is a realist. An idealist. Aristotle rejected that. For Aristotle, the form of the thing is embedded in the thing in itself. And that makes the beginnings of modern science at least possible. And that holds through the great tradition all the way, literally, to Newton. As a matter of fact, it still in many ways divides some forms of physics from each other today. Then the Newtonian universe is stable and objective and calculable, whereas the relative world is relative to place, and the infinitesimally small world is even more relative and can be relative neither to space nor time in many regards for quantum physics. But anyway, much too deep for us. Realism says that the object or item has a reality independent of the thinking about it. So I'm looking at the table across the room. That table exists whether I am viewing it or not. So it has a stability in place and time that is in many ways privileged over any of our thoughts about it. So the reality of the object is only the thinking of them. Now I've talked about Aristotle here. Um, if I for Aristotle, the form of the thing is embedded and is the cause, the basic cause of our recognition, of our reminiscere, of our remembering of that object. And here's the way this works. This is the best example I can give. I see someone coming way across the parking lot, walking toward me. I don't know at that time whether it's Sasquatch, a woman, or a man. I don't know at age. I don't know any of the particulars about that thing. But as it gets closer, I began to form literally my 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 knowing of that thing. And what I essentially know is that is its form. It is a human form. Maybe it has a big coat on. I can't recognize. Maybe it's not recognizable as man or woman or old or young, but the basic form of the thing is human being. That's the form that Aristotle is talking about. And it's that form that knocks us on top of the head and says, that's what it is. That's the form that Aristotle talks about. Now, the form is simply very vague. It has no particulars at this point. It's purely substantive and has no defining characteristics, but it excites in the brain its own knowledge. So for Aristotle, the brain is made for the world, and the world is made for the brain, and they're wired together, and neither the twain can be separated. So,
Also,
yeah,
uh, not really, but to me, what you were saying in that description, though, uh, perception increases the more we think about it.
yeah, the
The more,
particulars increase the more we see. That was the way I would say it. So
okay,
I see Charles. I see you coming across the parking lot. I don't know it's you yet, but I know your essence already. I know what is essentially you, and that is that you're bipedal. You get closer, and I see that you have short hair, and I guess that you're a man. And then as you get even closer, I say, aha, that's Charles. So I know I increasingly know particularity about you. But the very
uh,
exciting thing about you is this core that you have. And it's that essence that makes you a human being. And that's the reason that Aristotle is, we'll get to this later, Aristotle is so significant
I
in, in human thinking because it is that essence that makes you beautiful and unique. And it's that which is the most significant thing. Not
uh,
not our particulars, not our sex, not our skin color, It's that makes you a true human being.
And also, uh, I'm sorry for injecting so much, but I really like this. Uh, and going back to what you say, I would have been walking across that parking lot whether you seen me or not.
Exactly. Yeah,
So I existed independent of your.
exactly. You're not a fragment of my imagination. You are really there. And the first thing I notice about you is your there-ness, I guess we might say.
Uh-huh.
So that's where my brain comes in to you. I recognize the there-ness, and it's that I hesitate to say, but I'll go with this. It's that there-ness for Aristotle that makes you beautiful. And it's that there-ness that guarantees that you have every right in the world. It's that there-ness that guarantees your existence and the brilliance and the beauty of that existence. And it doesn't depend on how smart you are, what your sex is, what your color is. It depends on nothing except your human essence. And
You.
that is absolutely beautiful. That is your virtue. That is your arete. That is your excellence, according to Aristotle. Now, we're going to build a whole way of thinking about ethics on this. That's going to be the last part of what we do. After we finish this exam coming up, we're going to move to Plato and Aristotle. Both talk about arete with a very different sense of what human excellence is. We'll save that to later, but that's the they that's the difference between Plato and Aristotle on one hand, and Plato's idealism, where the reality comes from above and lands in you some way, and Aristotle, whose essence is inside you already, and Kant that says your essence is in your individuality, your individual brain, your mental capacity, your rationality. I hate to use that word, but your rationality, your capacity for rational. This, and again, now, Kant and Aristotle share this to some degree. It's not the whatever huge amount of that rationality you have, but the very possession of rationality, which means that some people that we think of as having mental deficiencies of some point in both Kant and Aristotle, they're still unique individuals because they have the capacity, however limited, of reason. So it's not, you don't have to be a genius to possess either under Aristotle or Kant this beautiful level of perfection, because your perfection is not in your capacity, your perfection is in you. So let's go on here in a minute. Now, we've heard about Plato's idealism. We've heard about Descartes' idealism. But Plato's idealism is the form itself that
Yeah.
the soul vaguely recollects, and it's the job of a Socrates to increase your knowledge of that, to make your soul more acquainted with what it really is. That's the purpose of the teacher. That's the purpose of philosophy. In order to acquaint you, it's never going to be perfect, but you can sort of increase your awareness of that realm through the interaction with a great teacher or through even personal study and education. So education makes people more aware of what really is true. So that's that ideal. That's the one kind of idealism. Second kind of idealism, both idealism. Second kind of idealism is Descartes' idealism, where I have an idea and I know that I'm having that idea. I can't be deluded about that idea. Nobody could be fooling me into thinking that I have an idea. It's a very lively thing within me. I know that I'm thinking. So it's God then that makes sure that my thought, the thing that I'm thinking, the thing that's in me, connects to the thing that's outside of me. So that's another form of idealism. But the idea, everything begins with the idea. Kant says everything begins with the idea. Me of an idea that's vibrant and real, but I still don't 100% know that it connects to anything outside of me. As a matter of fact, there's a famous um, statement by Kant that we can never know the thing in itself. And that means whether that's God or whether it's the table. So gods and tables are both problematic for Immanuel Kant. The only thing that we have in Kant is each other's signature experiences and a language that allows us to say, do you see that? Yes, I see that. So then we know we got a better chance of being right, but we never know perfectly. We never actually see into the essence of something. As a matter of fact, there is no essence. There's simply only probability. Now that's pretty tough, but he gets that from his connection to Hume. Now, Kant's trained as a rationalist. He's trained as a Descartes person. And there's a famous statement where he says, Hume awakened me from my dogmatic slumber. Uh, and I think that I'm going to sort of pull a halt to the lecture today because that's a lot of information. So I want people to have time to process that and think about that before we actually get into Hume.
Uh,
Hume is the perfect skeptic here. Now there are a lot of American philosophers that try to give Hume try to make Hume into some sort of I don't mean rationalist, but making more rational, not philosophical rationalism, but making more palatable. But I think he truly is a skeptic. He's a solipsist. For him, SOLIPICISM. There is no such thing as truth. Period. End of dictation. It's all over. Drop the hammer. Um, there is no truth in Hume. And a lot of people like Hume because they think he does away with God. With Hume, we can be skeptical about God. The problem with Hume, and Kant saw this hook, line, and sinker, he saw it better than anybody else, is Hume not only makes the existence of God questionable, he makes the existence of science, math, human thinking questionable.
oh,
Um, so there simply is no truth if Hume is right. So that is where Kant takes up Hume. He understood better than anybody else, certainly better than the empiricist. He understood Hume, the real problem that Hume presented, not just to philosophy, but to mathematics, to science, to politics. If there's no truth, if there's nothing to look forward to, if there's no pattern of behavior that is acceptable, if there's no pattern of behavior that improves our lives, we are just in a mel of a hess. So that's what Kant realizes. But he
Uh-huh.
also forever proves, I think, that Hume was absolutely wrong about that. So we'll pick that up the next time. So remember, not just you, Charles, but everybody else. We've got a test on this being handed out on the 12th. And now, again, there may be a day or three here fudge factor depending on how far we get in these lectures. And I'm trying not to overwhelm you.
Yeah.
But it would be due a week later. And
Yeah.
it'll be essentially the format that it was last time.
What will which chapters will the next one all cover? Because we haven't took an exam lately.
Right. So that would be let me I want to make sure I'm telling you right here. It's going to basically cover 5 and 6 together as one chapter. Remember, we read both those at the same time.
Uh-huh.
7 and 8.
Okay.
So for our purposes, and you've got to pay attention to the lectures here. If you remember, we read chapter 6 first, and there's a good reason for doing that. And you won't get that unless you listen to the lectures on 6 and 5.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
plan on going back over everything. The lectures and the videos are not that long. So before I ever take the exam, my plan is to uh, just go over everything again to bring it fresh to memory.
well, that would be wise if everyone did that, because you need to know why we did 6 and 5 together. And you need to know how really they're one chapter. Even though they're two, they're in reality one, because Hobbes is an egoist. As a matter of fact, he should have just made his chapter on Hobbes longer rather than having 2 chapters, because
Uh-huh.
Hobbes is the essential egoist and one of the essential thinkers of all time because of his idea of the social state and how important that is for human survival. So we got 6 and 5 together, and I mean 6 and 5, not 5 and 6. So we got 6 and 5, 7 and 8, and I
Uh-huh.
can guarantee you that there are probably going to be more questions out of the lecture on 8 than out of the textbook. So it's
Okay.
just one more reason for making sure you pay attention to these, and I want to keep them. I want to keep them. I want to keep them shorter because I don't want people to be overwhelmed with concepts and stop paying attention. So it's kind of like a short sermon in church. Sometimes you get more out of a church short sermon than you do out of hour sermon, or at least I do. So anyway, that's all for today. Um,
Okay.
so just make sure that you kind of study through these ramblings that we do in these lectures, and of course read your textbook.
Yes, sir.
All right. In that case, I'm going to stop the share here, and I'm going to get out of the recording, and I bid everybody a good day, to the ones that are listening and to the ones that will listen. If anybody has
Dr.
any questions, shoot me an email. So,
Dr. Yen,
yes, sir.
your sound, I don't know if it was the absence of the microphone or whatever. It was great at first. Uh, Toward the end, it started degrading very badly, scratchy, and it was getting. I was going to mention it if it was going to go on, but I'm just saying something happened with the sound.
Well, I was moving around. As long as I'm looking straight, if you see I'm looking at, normally I have an external microphone on. This time my cat's got it or something. I don't know where it went to. But but when I start moving around, then you start losing the direct connection with the speaker on the computer, and I think that's probably what caused it. I will find it and make sure we use it the next time.
Okay, thank you,
Thanks for
Dr. Gibb.
yeah, thanks for reminding me about that.
All right.
All right,
Thank you.
talk to everybody later. Bye.